Welcome to Dig Deep, the mining podcast. In this podcast, we go deep into mining news, hot topics, and live interviews with mining professionals and leading figures in the mining industry. Introducing your host, Rob Tyson, founder and director of Mining International and Mining International Executive, a leading global mining recruitment and headhunting agency.
Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, the show that brings you the latest insights, thought leadership, and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's show, we've got Kurt Budge, who's the CEO of Leading Edge Materials, who are a European-focused company at the forefront of the energy transition, developing projects in critical raw materials that are essential to the future of clean energy, electric mobility, and advanced technologies. In this episode, we're going to get an overview of leading edge materials and discuss how today's shifting geopolitical landscape creates unique opportunities for companies strategically positioned in the critical minerals space. We're also going to explore the broader outlook for rare earth elements and natural graphite, and where Leading Edge is focusing its efforts across three core business areas. Kurt's also going to share why the Norra Kärr project in Sweden is considered so vital to Europe's supply chain resilience. And we'll also look ahead at what's next for the company as it helps build more sustainable and secure materials future for the region. So that's welcome, Kurt, back to the podcast. Kurt, how you doing?
I'm very good, Rob. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good. And you were on the podcast a few years ago. So obviously a lot has happened since then. So I just wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about your career, a little bit about yourself, how you got into the industry, and how your career has developed from back in the day to current with your position at Leading Edge. So I will hand it over to you.
So I grew up with a connection to the coal industry. My father was running a business that was an open cast coal contractor to British Coal. So for whatever reason, when I was finishing my A-levels, I decided to go and do mining engineering at the Royal School of Mines. And from then on, after a brief stint in finance, ended back up in the coal industry. So I worked for RJB Mining just pre-privatization. I joined the company in 1994 and worked in surface mining, all in operations and permitting for a period. Like a lot of engineers, early 2000s, I went and did an MBA at London Business School. And that was, at that point in time, I was actually thinking about getting out of the industry. I probably told you this before, but then ended up joining Rio Tinto's business evaluation department for 5 years. And saw Rio go through a real period of transition there, and clearly the industry as a whole, because we went through a period where incredibly strong commodity prices on the back of China growth, and then the global financial crisis in 2008. So I left Rio in 2010, and since then I've been in the junior mining sector for the best part of what is now 15 years or so, in different capacities. Started off in private equity, then broker, working with a brokerage, and then in a succession of juniors. And since 2014, I found myself first as the CEO of Beowulf Mining, which is developing the Kallak iron ore project in Sweden, and now with Leading Edge Materials, developing a portfolio, as you said, of critical raw materials projects in the EU. So, yeah, a lot of experience, a few scars on the back, like a lot of people in this industry, but hopefully better and wiser for it.
Yeah, certainly. So for our listeners who are unfamiliar with Leading Edge Materials, just wondering if you can just give us a quick snapshot of the company.
So we're a Canadian company. We're listed in Toronto on the Venture Exchange, but also we're listed in Stockholm on the Nasdaq First North, and we're traded in New York and Frankfurt. We have a portfolio of critical raw materials projects. In Sweden, we have a graphite mine, which is built and permitted. That's called Vox Graphite. That's been in existence since before 2000. But every time it's looked to come on stream and into the market, the Chinese have dominated the graphite space, all the supply chain. So it hasn't found its place yet. Then we have the Norra Kärr heavy rare earth project. Clearly, we'll talk later about rare earths. That's 100% owned as well. And we're currently applying for a mining lease for Norra Kärr, which gives us the right to mine for 25 years when we're successful. And then lastly, we have an exploration alliance in Romania, which is quite interesting in its own right. It's brownfield exploration. It's former uranium mining areas. Within our license, we have one particular mine, Avram-Yanku, that was a major supplier of uranium to the Soviet Union back in the day. And what you also have within the system is polymetallics, and that's really what we've been focusing on: nickel, cobalt, but also lead, zinc, copper, silver. So as you said, 3 businesses in one. That does make life slightly complex at times, but lots of opportunities for the company.
Yeah. How do the current state of obviously geopolitics benefit the company's assets, obviously given the 3 jurisdictions that you're in, and given your position in the critical raw materials space?
I think I've had the benefit in recent weeks of being at 3 different events in 3 different countries in the European Union. So I was at Kokkola Material Week in Finland. I was then at Raw Materials Week in Brussels. And lastly, this week, I was at the Swedish Mining Association's Autumn Summit. And they're all covering off different aspects of critical raw materials, but also critical raw materials and how they play into European resilience. So with the portfolio that Leading Edge has, specifically the graphite and the rare earths, in prior to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, all the conversation around critical raw materials was around the energy transition. So if we talk about graphite and rare earths, we're talking about either battery materials or we're talking about permanent magnets. And those permanent magnets go into wind turbines and electric motors. Since the invasion, and more apparent over the last couple of years, really, it's around both energy transition, not to be forgotten, but also defense applications. And how, if you look at some of the analysis that's done about military equipment or armaments, graphite goes into multiple uses. And it's the same with heavy rare earths, particularly, which is our competitive advantage. And what differentiates the Norra Kärr asset from many other rare earth projects is their application in key technologies, which if you don't have them as an ingredient, you don't have any equipment. Missile systems, targeting systems, these kind of applications. And also, you see lots of slides these days, especially on LinkedIn, about the quantity of rare earths that goes into fighter jets and submarines and all these things. So this is where, in the conversation that's happening now in Europe, the introduction of the Critical Raw Materials Act last year in 2024, the Strategic Projects Initiative that the European Union has come up, where they created a list of 47 projects within the EU and another 13 without. And clearly, when I was at the Brussels Raw Materials Summit, it's about urgency. So what we've seen in the rare earth space, specifically in geopolitics this year, is a trade conflict between the US and China. And that's had 2 instances in April. First in April, where China started to restrict exports, and then again in October. What that has done is it sent shockwaves through the supply chain. And even though especially the October restrictions have been put on temporary hold for a year, I think it is, that nervousness and uncertainty persists. And so the drive for diversification is more important than ever to build, to reduce what is an unhealthy overdependency on a single supplier of critical raw materials.
What does the big picture look like for rare earth elements and natural graphite, in your opinion?
I think, rare earth elements is the one that gets all the headlines, especially since Donald Trump came to power. I think it's, again, these key technologies, defense systems, and the energy transition that rely on supply of heavy rare earths. Coincidentally, when I was in Brussels for the Raw Materials Summit, there was a Reuters article that basically the headline was, "The West is scrambling to find heavy rare earths." When China decides to turn off the tap, all the supply chain is desperate to find new sources. That article then covered about what other countries are doing, specifically the US. So what we've seen this year is that the US administration's response to China's restrictions of exports, they have then gone and directly invested in the supply chain. They've gone and invested in mining, they've gone and invested in processing, and also magnet manufacturing. With MP Materials, which is mainly a light rare earths deposit, the US government has bought a $400 million stake in the company. And at the same time, the Department of War has put in place a contract of $150 million. That has given investors in the capital markets the confidence to then provide debt funding. And I think sometimes, rare earths projects can be a little bit complex for the equity markets to understand. Clearly, when China has dominated the market for so many years, that they control the price. And so that makes it difficult for capital markets sometimes to assess the value of rare earths projects. And what the US is doing now is only replicating the strategy that the Chinese have adopted over decades. It was a state-sponsored industrial strategy to build a dominant position in a sector which is fundamentally important to our way of living and our security. So they've done it. The Americans are doing it. The Canadian government has offered support and to rare earths projects in Canada. Actually, the US has stretched its arm over the border and taken stakes in Canadian projects as well. And the Australians are also doing it in different ways and direct funding into rare earths projects. This is something that the European Union is starting to catch up on. The strategic projects process is one of their tools, but it is at a much slower pace than any other nation is adopting. And I think what is most telling is that to give yourself this diversification, it takes both the public purse, but also that then unlocks the capital markets to put finance into projects such as the one that we're developing. So I'm hopeful that the pace of change is going to accelerate, but that's to be seen.
As we mentioned, you're in 3 districts and obviously countries. Where's your focus at the moment? Which country and which project?
I think no surprise to you, given how much I've talked about rare earths, it's with the Norra Kärr heavy rare earth elements project in Sweden. That deposit was discovered by the Swedish Geological Survey in the 1900s and designated national interest by the SGU in 2011, just because of its critical importance of the rare earths that were acknowledged back in 2011 as important to Sweden and the European Union. And then Norra Kärr has been part of the European conversation about reduced dependency on China for more than a decade. If I go back, sometimes when I'm talking to the European Union about the challenges of developing projects, mining projects specifically in Europe, because of permitting or access to risk capital, I tend to use their own words against them and show them what has been said before about this project. And it's not by a company that's trying to promote its assets. It's what's been said by the Geological Survey in Sweden. And then in 2014, the European Rare Earths Competency Network, which said about Norra Kärr, if you address the issues that challenge European mining projects, permitting number one, and adequate finance, then Norra Kärr would have been in production by 2020. And when we consider the significance of Norra Kärr, and to give you a comparison, Lynas Rare Earths, who are one of the most significant players outside of China, if not the most significant player, both in lights and heavies, they announced at the end of October that they're developing an expanded facility in Malaysia to produce heavy rare earths, and the nameplate capacity of that is 250,000 tons of dysprosium and 50,000 tons of terbium. And Norra Kärr's estimated production will be 238 tons of dysprosium. This is oxides, and 248 tons of dysprosium and 38 tons of terbium. These two assets are on a par with each other, and but yet we have struggled Norra Kärr has a long permitting history, and it's not unique in that. Many mining projects in the Nordics have struggled because of the sometimes inefficiency of permitting processes. And my belief, really, and what I say a lot, is that it should be the case that if geological surveys and mining inspectorates are handing out exploration licenses, that if you find something, you should really have the rights to develop it. If you tick all the boxes, you're either mining or you're not. And with a case like Norra Kärr, that is a strategic asset for Europe, that we will find a way, because we're a responsible company. I have a hard time convincing stakeholders who live around the project that I share the same values as them. I'm not there to destroy the environment. I'm there to run the best possible mining operation. But we have within the company a very significant asset. It's got a huge body of technical work that sits behind it, 16 years of technical work. We already had a mining lease in 2013. We had a PFS in 2015. And what we've done is we redesigned the project in the late teens to increase the commercial potential with industrial minerals as well as rare earths, but also to reduce the scale of the activities at site. So we reduced the footprint of the site by 65%. We increased water efficiency, and we took away all the chemical processing that had been due to take place on site and was permitted at one point. Now we've got two sort of businesses that we're trying to develop. One is the extraction part at Norra Kärr, and one is the downstream that we'll put onto an industrial site somewhere in the Nordics. So, long-winded answer, but Norra Kärr, as you probably hear, is my main focus. Near-term milestones for Norra Kärr are the decision on the mining lease, which we hope in the near term, but then also by the middle of next year, I hope that we've refreshed the pre-feasibility study that we've done, and then we're straight into environmental permitting. Because the Reuters article that came out a few weeks ago about the crisis in heavy rare earth supply, you've got permanent magnet manufacturers in Europe, specifically the CEO of Vacuum Schmelzer, who's taking the platform and saying exactly the same thing. And Vacuum Schmelzer is doing deals with Canadian companies and Pensana down in Angola. Everybody's trying to sew up these supply chains to give the resilience that Europe needs. And that means that our asset, even though it's been a little bit below the radar, I'm certainly sort of climbing up the ladder and shouting a bit louder in terms to make people aware that it's okay for Europe to sign these bilateral deals. But actually, don't forget, mining in Europe has a long history. We're actually very good at it. And Sweden, that's what gets me excited about working in Sweden. It's not permitting, I promise you that, but it's the innovation and the collaboration and the ability to design projects and create businesses that are of the highest quality and working to the highest standards. That's why I get out of bed in the morning. Secondly, the graphite, Volkswagen Graphite, we're doing work at the moment where we're trying to understand whether or not we can come up with a new business plan, because Europe only has, you can count the number of graphite mines in Europe on one hand, less than, I think it's three fingers. And so it's a case of, again, Europe needs graphite and don't, like the UK government did, shut all the coal mines and then have energy crisis. Keep these strategic assets available, give floor prices. That's another thing we haven't talked about. The different jurisdictions around the world are establishing floors to make it easier for capital markets to understand what returns will be on investments. But same with graphite. Keep these assets open, put the supply chains together, and then let's build that resilience that we really need. And then finally with Romania, it's a difficult conversation sometimes with investors when, as you highlighted at the very beginning, you've got three businesses in one. And so to simplify this company, we're now looking. We've done a competent persons report on our Romanian exploration assets, and we're looking for finance to go directly into those assets. So just to recap, long-winded answer, Norra Kärr is my main focus.
I suppose following on for what you just said, what makes Norra Kärr so critical and obviously important to Europe?
It's the heavy rare earth content. And, the example I gave you about Lynas Rare Earths and their announcement to expand their Malaysia facility and produce heavy rare earths, their nameplate capacity, 250,000 tons of dysprosium oxide, and then 50 tons of terbium oxide on an annual basis. And Norra Kärr estimates are that we'll produce 248 tons of dysprosium oxide and 38 tons of terbium oxide. And so, again, we tend to look at the global market. I think we've relied on the global market for decades. We forget that we actually have strategic assets in our own backyard, and that with the proper design and engineering, those assets can be brought into production. Permitting remains a challenge, but we have designed and engineered a project which is fit for its environment, and our value set is such that we believe we can operate it, in harmony with the environment around us. But that's what makes Norra Kärr. It's again, it's not us that say that it's important as a junior miner that's trying to promote its company. It's the fact that it has this long history of other groups saying this is strategically important to Europe. And I believe that the European Union, especially with things like the Critical Raw Materials Act and the strategic project application process and the designations that come from that, should try and create as many options for supply as possible. And in that context, we are the most advanced heavy rare earth project in Europe.
There's often a lot of talk around Europe, obviously needing a strategic autonomy in obviously critical minerals. Just wondering if you can just walk us through what that actually means in practical terms and how projects like Norra Kärr can contribute to, I suppose, the overall goal.
Yeah, I think in terms of extraction, so the Critical Raw Materials Act came in, had very specific targets around the percentage that it wanted from extraction, which was 10% for domestic. It also had targets around processing and recycling. So the circular economy is very important to Europe. But so what it's doing is trying to pull on multiple levers. So it's not a case that everything that we need in Europe will be mined in Europe. So that's where you have the 13 strategic projects that are in friendly nations that will look to supply materials into Europe. But if it's not mining, then it's processing. And if it's not processing, it's manufacturing in these critical supply chains. Again, we've talked a lot about heavy rare earths, but with heavy rare earths, it's specifically permanent magnets and the critical industries that they go into, energy transition and defense. And if they're not available, you're not manufacturing anymore. And if you're not manufacturing, you've got a real issue. So we have the policy. I guess what I've heard, and I said I've been to multiple events in recent weeks, that we see far greater action and direct action taking place in other jurisdictions around the world, specifically the US, and Europe is lagging behind. Now, I think what is often said about Europe is that, well, the line from Sweden was that Europe is awake, but it's not getting out of bed. Now, that might be slightly unfair, but there is frustration. And when you see articles like the Reuters article about the crisis in heavy rare earths, and you hear the CEO of Vacuum Schmelzer talking, you see announcements from Lynas, and Pensana have also put out an announcement about increasing production of heavies. You see the critical importance of having access to supply, and then being able to control the supply chain as well, and having the control supply chain in your hands and not relying on global markets to satisfy your needs. I mean, we have to take some responsibility, and it seems a bit strange as a British citizen talking like a European. I feel European. I've been working in Europe now for the last 11 years, but we have to take a responsibility for for putting these supply chains together. I think the Critical Raw Materials Act is great legislation. I think the European Union, the European Investment Bank, is trying to put that into practice as quickly as possible. But I think from all stakeholders in industry, it's a case of we need to do more and we need to do it now. And it's not a case of picking one particular tool or another, and creating one option or another. It's everything now in a responsible way.
What would you like to see governments do more of? And I suppose, obviously, if we're just looking at Europe, and there's obviously different governments, but I suppose overall, what would you like to see governments do more in the critical mineral space and the rare earth space to really push on and obviously compete with other countries around the world? Is there any, I suppose, glaring challenges or issues that you see the government that they could act upon to move everything more forward and quicker?
The two key ones, Rob, are the same ones that have been talked about forever. If we speak again about Norra Kärr, this report by the European Rare Earth Competency Network back in 2014 that said if you solve permitting and finance, Norra Kärr would be in production by 2020. Norra Kärr had a permit mining lease in 2013 that was revoked in 2016 by Supreme Administrative Court. It wasn't necessarily the fault of the company or the predecessor company to Leading Edge. It was a procedural issue. And then you get changes in the permitting process, and you get different opinions about what it is you're required to do and what it is you're not required to do. I'm hoping with the changes that have taken place in Sweden in recent years, that has been cleaned up. But there is certainly a pace at which things happen in Europe, which they don't elsewhere in the world. And a good example would be that we've had an application in the system for a mining lease for a year, almost a year now. It went in December last year. We don't have a decision yet. Our project, which is just it's not the final permit, because we still need to go through environmental permitting. It gives you the rights to mine for 25 years, but there are other milestones to get over. Our project is just a quarry. It's literally a quarry. And the materials that we're handling are pretty benign, such that, and we could do this in a way, and we're not talking about large scale, muck shifting 1 million tons a year, there or thereabouts. So this is not, from a mining perspective, this is not a complex operation at site. It's just excavation, comminution, magnetic separation, and shipping products. So, but if you did this in other jurisdictions in the world, maybe greenfield sites with less inhabitants, this would be expedited. And what you hear in these different forums that I've been in, whether or not it be in Finland, where you're listening to people talk about the possibility of conflict in Europe in the coming years, the need to have an industrial machine that creates the military capability, but that industrial machine needs to be fed by critical raw materials. If you want a mine to produce, you can't just turn a tap and start the critical raw materials flow. We are talking probably a minimum of 10 years from discovery to a built mine that's producing. We have to find a way of expediting these processes. That's number one. And then the second one, clearly, and it's always the same when you speak to juniors, because we don't have this portfolio of cash generating assets that, say, a major company has, and we're the SME event of the mining sector, is that risk capital, and in the specific case where rare earth companies, it needs to come, there needs to be some risk capital that's provided by the public purse. The shareholders of Leading Edge and the predecessor companies have invested roughly, I think it is 9 million Canadian into keeping Norra Kärr alive as a project for Europe. And now something needs to change, because somebody needs to actually say, this is really important to Europe, and put some of that risk capital in. And we're not talking big numbers to close the gap to get to pre-feasibility. And then we've changed the face of the project. With a mining lease and a pre-feasibility study, it's a different world. And that's within, the next 6 months and next year, I see.
And lastly, what's the sort of short and medium-term outlook for the company?
Well, I probably won't get a mining lease decision before Christmas, but hopefully in the near future. But then, Norra Kärr mining lease decision and the completion of the pre-feasibility study work streams. We've got big ambitions around both the extraction, but also the downstream. The downstream is an exciting business in its own right. And we see other businesses, investors investing specifically in downstream projects rather than upstream and taking that permitting risk we talked about. But then, elsewhere in the business, coming up with a new business plan for Voxna Graphite. And then lastly, finding new investors for our exploration portfolio in Romania, which we're still big believers in the potential. But, we just need to focus our financial resources on the heavy rare earths at the moment.
Great. Kurt, really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your story, giving us an update on leading edge materials, and obviously speaking about the few various jurisdictions that you're in around obviously critical minerals and the rare earth space. And wish you obviously all the best going into next year, and hopefully, fingers crossed, you get that mining lease. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they want to follow the story, if they've got any questions, how can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels are you on?
leadingedgematerials.com and also on LinkedIn. So, and if they follow me, then also you'll see my connection to Leading Edge on my profile as well.
Yeah, we'll include those in the show notes accompanying this for easy access. So, all the best, and hopefully you can come on sometime next year, maybe mid-year, mid-2026, and you'd be able to hopefully tell us that you've got a mining lease. So, all the best for the remainder of the year going into 2026.
Thanks very much, Rob.
No worries. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Appreciate your continued support. Keep sharing these episodes far and wide. Obviously, we're talking about Europe and the importance of critical minerals and rare earths. It's obviously dominated by China, and I think obviously Europe is behind a lot of other continents, and we need to, I suppose, get our act together. Not necessarily us, people in the mining industry, maybe some of the governments around the world. So, but we're still working towards trying to develop some of these projects. So please keep sharing these episodes. Thank you again for listening. And until next time, happy mining.
Thank you for listening. Remember to reach out to Rob via the show notes, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, happy mining, helping each other to improve the mining industry.